Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Pa! A crunching sound broke the otherwise fairly harmonious atmosphere at the early morning table. The strong coffee, still slightly hot, traced a parabola in the air before splashing all over Mark's face. The brown liquid ran down his cheek and dripped onto his clean white shirt, haloing it. Julia's movements remained in a splashing position, her eyes wide and her chest heaving violently as if she couldn't believe she'd made such a move. The crystal chandelier above the dining room table reflected this clearly and coldly. "Julia, are you crazy?" Mark looked at his wife incredulously, his voice trembling slightly from the extreme shock. How could he not expect that his wife, who was usually strong but still gentle, would act so excessively? I. Julia's voice was also a little shaky as she seemed to finally snap out of her anger, a flicker of panic in her eyes, but then replaced by annoyance. "Mark, how many times have I told you that David needs help? Why are you just so cold-blooded?" "Cold-blooded and heartless?" Mark let out a bitter laugh as he slowly picked up his napkin and wiped the coffee stains from his face, a hint of exhaustion in his movements. "Julia, how long is this help as you call it going to last? David, he's not a kid anymore. He needs to be held accountable for his actions. He's my brother." Julia's voice rose steeply, so sharp it almost pierced her eardrums. "Isn't it natural for family members to help each other? Are you still a man if you are so calculating? Family should help each other, yes?" Mark tried to keep his tone as calm as possible, but his insides were already as rough as a sea swept by a gale. "But this help should be based on equality and respect, not on the endless demands and oppression of one party over the other." Mark's words pierced Julia's heart like a sharp dagger. She clenched her lips, her face a shade of green and white. She knew, of course, that Mark was right and that David had indeed taken advantage of their kindness and generosity over the years. But so what? He was her only brother. She couldn't stand by and watch him fall on hard times, couldn't watch his projects in LA fail. "Mark, I know you have a problem with David, but this is different." Julia tried to defend herself, a hint of pleading in her voice. "His project this time really has a lot of potential, over in Los Angeles. A lot of organizations are willing to support it. And you know what? He's even on the verge of winning a very important business award. And as long as he can hold out a little longer, everything will be fine." "An important business award?" Mark sneered, sarcasm in his eyes. "Julia, are you still living in a dream? Do you really believe that David's so-called project is any kind of serious business? He's just using our money to fill his holes that will never be filled." How could you say that about him?" Julia was shaking with anger. She couldn't accept Mark's dissing of David. "He's just unlucky. He just needs a little time. Why can't you just trust him one more time?" "Trust? How many times have I given him that chance?" Mark's voice grew out of control as well, and he slammed the table so hard it shook the dinner plates and made them jump. "How many jobs has he changed since he graduated from college? How many projects has he done? Which one didn't end halfway? Which one didn't rely on us to wipe his ass? Tell me, what's the point of believing like this?" The atmosphere at the table had dropped to freezing point. Mark and Julia's argument, like a sudden storm, tears apart their otherwise peaceful lives. Mark took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. He knew that there was no point in continuing to argue. He looked at the woman in front of him, who was both familiar and unfamiliar, with disappointment and exhaustion. There was a time when they had sweet times and a vision for the future. But since when did their marriage become what it is now? "Julia, let's get a divorce." Mark's voice was soft, but it was like a thunderbolt that exploded in Julia's ears. "What did you say?" Julia's eyes widened as she couldn't believe her ears. "I said, let's get a divorce," Mark repeated, each word spoken clearly and firmly. "I'm tired, really tired. I don't want to go on like this." Julia's body swayed, and she held onto the table before she managed to stand still. Her face was as pale as paper, and her lips had lost their color. "Mark, you can't do this to me. I have to." Mark's voice held a note of unspeakable exhaustion. "I can't let you, and David, continue to consume me like this anymore. I have, already, nothing left." With those words, Mark turned and left the restaurant, leaving the home that had suffocated him. His back, in the early morning sunlight, looked especially forlorn and lonely. Julia, left alone at the table, finally couldn't help but cry out in pain. Her cries, echoing in this empty room, seemed especially bleak and helpless. After leaving the house, Mark walks aimlessly down the street. He didn't know where he was supposed to go or what he was supposed to do. All he knew was that he had to get away from Julia, from the environment that was causing him so much pain and depression. Without realizing it, he walked up to the doorstep of his longtime best friend, Ryan. Mark rang the doorbell, and within moments, the door opened and Ryan's familiar face appeared before him. "Mark, what are you doing here? You look so bad. What happened?" Ryan asked with concern. Mark let out a bitter laugh and walked into Ryan's house. "I had a fight with Julia and she threw coffee in my face." "What?" Ryan's eyes glazed over in disbelief. "Is she crazy? Over what?" "It's not because of that baby brother of hers." Mark sat his ass down on the couch and told Ryan exactly what happened. Ryan was silent for a long time as he listened. Then he patted Mark on the shoulder and said, "Mark, I think you did the right thing. This is a marriage that you should have ended a long time ago." "But Mark trailed off, unsure of how to express the complexity of his feelings at the moment. "No buts," Ryan interrupted. "I know you still have feelings for Julia, but you have to understand that the relationship has gone sour. She's no longer the Julia you knew back then. She's been completely changed by her family, by her brother." "I'm just," said Mark, lowering his head. "I'm not happy about it, you know? I'm not willing to just lose to her, to David." "It's not about winning or losing, Mark," Ryan said. "It's about you. You have to live for yourself, not for anyone else. You've done enough for them now. It's time to think for yourself." Ryan's words, like a hammer, woke Mark up. Yes, for years he had lived for others, for Julia, for David, for that so-called family. But what about himself? What has he gained? What was left for him but endless pain and disappointment? "Thank you, Ryan." Mark looked up at Ryan with gratitude in his eyes. "I know what to do." "That's good." Ryan smiled. "Why don't you stay at my place tonight? Get some rest and don't think too much." Mark nodded. He really needed a quiet place to think about his future. Over the next few days, Mark began working on Julia and David. He discovered that Julia had wired a sizable deposit to David in faraway Los Angeles without his knowledge. And for this reason, he asked his friend who worked in the bank to confirm this record, as well as the specific company to which the money was transferred. Not only that, but he begins to notice some of Julia's erratic behavior. She began using an unfamiliar cell phone frequently and always deliberately avoided him. At one point, Mark surreptitiously checked the phone while Julia was in the shower. He found a lot of Julia and David's chat records. Most of the content is about the project, as well as a lot of complaints about Mark, one of which deeply pierced Mark's heart. If only he was like his father, know how to do things. If only he was like his father. Mark also finds out that Julia has sold many of the gifts she gave her in the past on secondhand platforms, which deeply stings Mark's heart. Mark took all of this information to heart, and these discoveries made his suspicions about Julia grow deeper and strengthened his resolve. He's going to fight back, and he's going to make Julia and David pay for their behavior. And the seed of vengeance had quietly taken root in his heart. Mark sat on the couch at Ryan's house, the spare Julia's cell phone in his hand, the screen still stuck on her chat screen with David, the harsh words and phrases, like a sharp needle, repeatedly stabbing him in the heart. If only he got it like his dad. Mark smiled to himself, understanding. In Julia's eyes, her own dedication and forbearance over the years had been rewarded with such a comment. "Mark, what are you going to do?" Ryan asked with concern as he handed Mark a glass of water. He knew that the incident had hit Mark hard, not just as an emotional betrayal, but as a kind of collapse of long-held trust. "I can't just let it go." Mark's eyes grew determined as he handed the phone back to Ryan. "I'm going to find out just how much Julia is hiding from me, and what's going on with that so-called project of David's." "I got your back," Ryan said. "Anything I can do to help, just ask. I have some friends over in Los Angeles that might be able to help." Over the next few days, Mark was a different person. Instead of being depressed and confused, he became active. He first contacted his friend who worked at the bank and asked for detailed records of the transfer of Julia's large deposit. Through the bank's internal system, his friend was able to find out more detailed information, confirming that the money was ultimately transferred to the same company that David had registered in Los Angeles. "Mark, that's a lot of money," a friend said on the other end of the line, "and the purpose of the transfer is vague. It looks like an investment, but there's no information at all about the specific program." "I know." Mark's brow furrowed as he thanked his friend for his help and hung up. Meanwhile, Ryan has started contacting his friend Sean in Los Angeles. Sean has been in the business world in Los Angeles for many years and is well connected, and, more coincidentally, his industry intersects, if not competes, with David's. "Ryan, this David you're talking about, I seem to have some recollection of him," Sean said on the other end of the phone. "In the last few years, he did work on quite a few projects over here in Los Angeles, but his reputation isn't very good, and a lot of people say that he's relying on his family's connections to get by." "What about this latest project of his? Have you heard anything about it?" Ryan asked. "You mean that project that's going to get a government-backed business award?" Sean's tone held a hint of disdain. "I've heard about that project as well. It's said to be a big investment, but not many people are clear about what exactly it does. However, I can ask around for you." Ryan relayed this information to Mark, and the two talked it over and decided to double down. Mark continues to investigate Julia's finances and her connection to David at home, while Ryan, through Sean, investigates David's companies and projects over in Los Angeles. In order not to spook anyone, Mark doesn't move out of Ryan's house for a while. He knew Julia would find out sooner or later that he'd checked her cell phone, and now he needed to be more careful in how he acted. He outwardly eased up on Julia a bit and pretended to be interested in David's project, offering to reconsider, which made Julia let down her guard a bit. That night, Julia got a call from David, and she walked out onto the balcony and lowered her voice. "David, how's it going over there? Are the preparations for the awards ceremony going well?" "Sis, everything is on schedule." David's voice sounded a bit smug. "Just don't worry, the award will be mine this time. And then, our company will be able to go to the next level." "That's good." Julia breathed a sigh of relief. "Still, you should keep an eye on Mark. He seems a little off lately. I've noticed he might have looked at my phone." "Looked at your cell phone?" David's voice became a little strained. "Did he say anything?" "That's not true. But it could be that I'm overthinking it. He and I have eased up a bit lately, and I told him you'd be contacting him to get him to reconsider the investment," Julia said. "Anyway, get caught up on your end of things, and as soon as the awards show is over, we'll—" Julia didn't continue, but David had gotten her point. The two chatted for a while longer before hanging up. What they didn't know was that Mark was standing in the shadows of the living room, listening in on their conversation. Although he was far away and could not hear some of the content clearly, he still keenly captured the key words award ceremony and investment. It seems that there is something really fishy going on with this project of David's. Over the next few days, Mark noticed some subtle changes in Julia's attitude towards herself. Instead of being aggressive like before, she became gentle and considerate. She began to take an active interest in Mark's life and even cooked for him herself. "Mark, you've been working hard lately, haven't you? Pay more attention to your health," Julia said softly as she pinched Mark's food. "It's okay," Mark responded lightly, knowing in his heart that this change in Julia was just to paralyze him and make him let his guard down. "By the way, David is going to call you in a few days. He wants to talk to you about his project." Julia pretended to mention it offhandedly. "As you know, he's always admired you and would like to be mentored by you." "Yeah." The corner of Mark's mouth curled into an imperceptible sneer. "That's great." He knew that Julia was testing him to see if he was really interested in David's project. He, in turn, could use the opportunity to learn more about David's plans. A few days later, Julia volunteered to mention that David had called Mark, but Mark seemed to keep putting it off. Julia begins to sidestep Mark and expresses the hope that they can make a trip to Los Angeles together to attend David's awards ceremony. Mark laughed coldly in his heart, but on the surface, he pretended to be in a difficult situation. "You know, I've been quite busy with work lately, And besides, I still have some misgivings about David's project. Mark, I know you had some misconceptions about David before, but this is really different. Julia's eyes were full of pleading. Just give him another chance, okay? Besides, this award ceremony is very important, and it would be a great support for David if we could attend it together. Mark couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness in his heart as he looked at Julia's face with anticipation written all over it. The woman he had once loved so dearly was now going to such lengths to deceive him for the sake of an indisputable brother. Okay, Julia, Mark finally agreed. I can make the trip to LA, but I hope it's really the last time. A glimmer of joy flashed in Julia's eyes as she hurriedly said, Of course, Mark, I promise. This will definitely be the last time. A few days later, there was good news from Sean's side. He had gathered a lot of negative information about David's company through various channels. Mark, this great uncle of yours, he's really something, Sean said over the phone. His company looks glamorous on the surface, but it's actually a mess, misrepresenting the progress of the project, exaggerating the return on investment, and even suspected of tax evasion. It's just like no evil. What about that award show of his? Was there anything wrong with that? Mark asked. Well, Sean hesitated for a moment. There's no conclusive evidence yet, but as far as I know, there's quite a bit of room for backroom maneuvering in the selection process of this award. With David's style of doing things, it's likely that he'll take some crooked paths. Mark's heart sank, and he knew that there was more going on than he thought. He must act quickly to stop David and Julia's plot. He asked Sean to help him contact a reliable private investigator, and he was going to Los Angeles. At the same time, Mark began secretly searching for some people in the know. He posted some information about David's company and program through some business forums and investor circles, hoping to find some insider tipsters. Soon after, Mark was contacted by a man who claimed to be a former employee of David's company. The man, named Mike, had been in charge of David's program, but left because he was unhappy with David's fraudulent behavior. Mr. Mark, I know about your relationship with David, Mike said on the phone, but I still have to tell you that that program of his is simply a scam. He used false information to deceive investors and then transferred the money to his account. I have some evidence here to back up what I'm saying. Mark's heart rejoiced as he finally found a key breakthrough. He sets up a meeting place with Mike and prepares to obtain that all-important evidence. Just then, Julia's attitude takes another subtle turn. She suddenly became paranoid and began checking Mark's cell phone and computer frequently, as if looking for something. Mark realizes that Julia may have sensed something. He had to move faster and could not delay any longer. He's going to get ahead of Julia and David and expose them for what they really are and make them pay for what they've done. Mark knows deep down that Julia has begun to doubt herself, leaving him little time. He must get the evidence in Mike's hands as soon as possible and expose Julia and David for what they really are before their plan succeeds. The meeting with Mike was arranged in a secluded cafe. In order to avoid Julia's stalking and suspicion, Mark asked Ryan to help create some illusion. He asked Ryan to tell Julia that he had an important work meeting and needed to travel urgently. Then he left his usual cell phone at home and set up a delayed auto-reply for a few common contacts. Instead, he secretly traveled to the location of his appointment with Mike. Mike arrived a little earlier than the appointed time, and he looked a little nervous as he kept looking around. When Mark walked into the cafe, he recognized him immediately. Mr. Mark? Mike asked, lowering his voice. It's me. Mark took a seat across from him. Did you bring the stuff? Mike nodded and handed Mark a file pouch from the backpack he was carrying. And here is all the evidence I could find, including David's company's fraudulent contracts, internal financial statements, and records of his bribes to the people involved. These are more than enough to prove that his program is an outright scam. Mark quickly flipped through the file, its contents alarming. He could never have imagined that David would be so bold as to forge so many documents and deceive so many investors. And Julia, how much is she really involved? Was she really kept in the dark by David? Or did she know the truth and was involved from the beginning? Thank you, Mike, Mark said solemnly as he closed the file. This evidence you've provided is very important. I will pay you a fee and guarantee your safety. Mr. Mark, I don't want your money. Mike shook his head. I'm only doing this because I don't want to see more people being cheated by David. I just hope you can expose his true colors as soon as possible so that he can be punished as he deserves." Understanding Mike's feelings, Mark nodded and assured, "Don't worry, I'll make sure the truth comes out." Saying goodbye to Mike, Mark immediately contacted Ryan and asked him to scan and send the evidence to Sean. He needed Sean to be ready on the LA side and make his move as soon as the time was right. After making all the arrangements, Mark sent a message to Julia, telling her that the meeting had gone well and that he might be a couple of days late. Although he knew it was cheating Julia, Mark couldn't care less at the moment. He had to buy time and end this farce as soon as possible. Back at Ryan's place, Mark locks himself in his room and begins to scrutinize the evidence Mike has provided. He discovers that David's program was, from the beginning, an elaborate scam. He fictionalized a promising technology project and then attracted large investments through falsified financial statements and exaggerated publicity. And in fact, most of the money was transferred to his overseas accounts for personal spending. What's even more shocking to Mark is that he realizes that Julia's role in this may be more important than he thought. In an internal email, David mentioned that he would like to thank Jay for his help and said that he would transfer a portion of the profits to Jay's account as previously agreed. Although it wasn't made clear who Jay was, Mark was almost certain that the person was Julia. Looking at the evidence, Mark's mind was filled with anger and disappointment. The woman he had once loved so much had gone to such lengths to deceive him and use him. It made him feel a wave of nausea and revulsion. Just then, Ryan walked in. "Mark, Sean's side is ready," he said. He contacted several local media outlets and is ready to expose David's scandal on the day of the awards ceremony. In addition, he's already submitted the evidence we've gathered anonymously to the authorities in Los Angeles, and they've said they'll launch an investigation as soon as possible. Good. A cold glint flashed in Mark's eyes. It's time to bring this farce to an end. Over the next few days, Mark kept a close eye on Julia's movements while staying in close contact with Ryan and Sean. He knew that a storm was coming. Finally, it was the week before the awards show. As originally planned, Mark and Julia should have departed for Los Angeles. "Mark, are you really ready?" Before she left, Julia reconfirmed with Mark, "I know you still have some doubts about David, but trust me, you'll see a change in him this time." "Don't worry, Julia," Mark smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "I can't wait to witness this moment." Julia didn't notice Mark's strange behavior, and she thought that Mark had really been convinced by her. She was full of joy as she took Mark's arm, and together they boarded the plane to Los Angeles. On the airplane, Julia looked extraordinarily excited, and she kept depicting to Mark the grandeur of the awards ceremony and the bright prospects for David after winning the award. While Mark just listened quietly, his mind was calculating his own plan. Upon arriving in Los Angeles, Julia took Mark to the luxury hotel that David had arranged for them. Along the way, Julia kept calling David to ask him about the preparations for the awards ceremony. "Mark, see, I told you David meant business this time, didn't I?" Julia said smugly. "He's prepared so much for this awards show, he won't let us down." "I hope so," Mark responded tersely. After settling in, Julia offers to meet David to discuss the details of the awards ceremony, and Mark doesn't go with her on the pretext that he's tired from the trip and needs to rest. Immediately after Julia left, Mark contacted Sean to confirm the plan of action. Everything was ready and waiting for the awards ceremony. The next day, Julia woke up early, changed into a gorgeous gown, and had her hair styled exquisitely by the hotel stylist. "Mark, what do you think of my outfit?" Julia asked with a smile as she twirled in front of Mark. "Beautiful," Mark replied perfunctorily. He just couldn't fathom how Julia could still be enjoying this so contentedly. Did she really think that she could hide everything she did from the world? "By the way, Mark, you have to be on your best behavior today," Julia said as she straightened her skirt. "David said that there will be a lot of important guests attending today, so you mustn't embarrass him." "Don't worry, Julia." A cold glint flashed in Mark's eyes. "I'm going to impress everyone for sure." Finally, it was time for the awards ceremony, and Mark and Julia arrived at the glittering venue in full costume. There were many celebrities, and the atmosphere was warm. David, as a family member of the honoree, was given a front row seat. He saw Mark and Julia and immediately greeted them warmly. "Sis, Mark, you guys are finally here," David said with a beaming face. "Come on, I'll introduce you to a few important partners." David took them to meet some of the so-called business partners. But Mark found that most of these people are some unheard of owners of small companies, and even a few are mixed in a variety of occasions of speculators. "Is this what you call a key partner?" Mark couldn't help but ask. "Mark, what do you mean by that?" David's face was a little hard to see. "They are all elites in the industry, and their future development potential is unlimited." "Is it? I don't think so." Mark sneered. "David, are you going to keep up the act when it comes down to it?" "Mark, don't go too far." Julia couldn't help herself. "What's the occasion today? Do you have to make a scene here?" "Making a scene? I'm just trying to show everyone the truth," Mark said, pulling a flash drive out of his pocket. "This has a list of what you and your dear brother have done over the years, and I think it will be of great interest to everyone." "Mark, you're crazy." Julia's face instantly turned white as she lunged to grab the flash drive from Mark's hand, only to be pushed away by Mark. "Security! Security!" David panicked as well, yelling and trying to stop Mark. But it was too late. Mark inserted the flash drive into the venue's computer and projected the image onto the big screen. At once, all those false financial statements, forged contracts, and records of bribing relevant people of David's company were presented to everyone. The scene was in an uproar. Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events. "What's going on here? Are these all fake? Oh my God, this is a fraud. It's horrible that we were fooled by such people. Call the police. Hurry up and call the police." There was a lot of talk in the room, and everyone glared at David. David and Julia, on the other hand, were like two street rats, woefully avoiding the accusations and abuse of the crowd. "David, what the hell is going on?" A guest who was supposed to present David with an award angrily questioned. "You have to give us an explanation." I, stammered David, but he couldn't get out a complete sentence. "Guys, I'm sorry this happened," Mark said as he walked up to the front desk and picked up the microphone. "My wife and I, too, were victims of this scam. We fell for David's rhetoric and lost a lot of money. Today, the reason I'm coming forward to expose the truth is that I don't want more people to fall for this scam." "Mark, why did you do this?" Julia sat paralyzed on the floor and looked at Mark with tears streaming down her face. She couldn't understand why the man she had loved so much would push her into the abyss so ruthlessly. "Why?" "Because this is the punishment you deserve." Mark looked at Julia without a trace of pity in his eyes. "You've deceived so many people and destroyed so many families. Don't you deserve to pay the price?" In the end, the drama ended with David being taken away by the police and Julia losing face. Mark, on the other hand, walked out of the meeting with his head held high in front of the crowd. He knew that he had won this revenge. However, his heart did not have the pleasure that he had imagined, but instead had a kind of indescribable bitterness and despondency. After the farce of the awards show, David's company quickly becomes a target. The Los Angeles Police Department intervened in the investigation, and the media's continued exposure made David's scam disappear, and his carefully woven lies and false promises seemed so pale in the face of hard evidence. Mark stood in front of the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling night scene of Los Angeles. In the distance, the red and blue lights of police cars flashed, cutting through the quiet of the night sky. He knew that the storm was just beginning. The phone vibrated. It was Ryan calling. "Mark, did you see that? The news is blowing up." Ryan's voice carried a hint of excitement. "David's company has been seized, and he himself has been taken away by the police for investigation." "I saw it." Mark's tone was calm and unruffled. "What's next? Any reaction from Julia's end?" "Her? How else is she going to react?" Ryan's tone held a hint of disdain. "She's probably beside herself right now. I heard that she mortgaged all your joint property before to help David. Now that David is down, won't those creditors of hers pounce on her like sharks that smell blood?" Mark was silent. Although he had expected Julia to face a difficult situation, when he really heard the news, a flicker of complex emotions flashed through his heart. After all, she had once been the woman he had loved dearly, the mother of his child. Mark, you're not going soft, are you? Ryan asked tentatively as he seemed to sense something different about Mark. I'm just a little emotional. Mark sighed. Forget it. I'll leave the LA side of things to you and Sean. I'm going back to New York. Back to New York? Why? Ryan was a little surprised. Things aren't over here yet. What if you leave? I'm no longer needed on this side of things. Mark said, I'm sure the law will give a just verdict. I, on the other hand, have more important things to do. After hanging up the phone, Mark began to pack his bags. He knew that Julia wouldn't give up easily. She would definitely try to recoup her losses by all means, and might even point the finger at him. He had to be prepared to deal with it. Sure enough, just as Mark was about to leave the hotel, he got a call from Julia. Mark, you asshole. On the other end of the line, Julia's voice was hoarse and angry. You did all this, didn't you? Why did you do this to me? Why did you destroy David? Julia, it's come to this. Do you still want to be obsessed? Mark said coldly, David is to blame for getting to this point. And you, as his accomplice, can't absolve yourself of the blame. I don't care. All I know is that you ruined him. You destroyed our family. Julia's voice is filled with despair and resentment. You think you've won? I'm telling you, I won't let you go. I'm going to make you pay. Yeah. The corners of Mark's mouth curved up in a cold arc. Try it then. After saying that, he hung up the phone and left the hotel without looking back. Upon returning to New York, the first thing Mark did was contact his attorney, who wanted to divorce Julia as soon as possible and protect his assets as much as possible. Mr. Mark, based on the information you provided and our preliminary investigation results, you are a no-fault party in this marriage. In the law firm, Helen, a competent middle-aged female lawyer, was analyzing the case to Mark. Moreover, you have strong evidence proving that your wife is directly linked to David's financial problems. You have a good chance of maximizing your benefits in terms of property division. I understand. Mark nodded. I only have one request. End this farce as quickly as possible. I understand. Helen agreed. But, Mr. Mark, you have to be prepared. Your wife, she may not compromise easily. From what you have of your wife and her brother's character, they may resort to some extraordinary means. I know. A cold glint flashed in Mark's eyes. I'll be careful. Over the next few days, Mark took care of the company's business while staying in close contact with his attorney. He knew that Julia's counterattack could come at any time. Sure enough, it wasn't long before he got a call from Julia's parents. Mark, I know that something unpleasant has happened between you and Julia. Julia's father said on the other end of the phone, a respected entrepreneur who had helped Mark quite a bit in the past. But after all, your husband and wife. So what can't you sit down and talk about? Does it have to go to court? Uncle, I'm sorry. Mark responded politely, but I'm afraid this time. It can't be summed up by the phrase unpleasant. Julia and David's behavior has touched my bottom line. But Mark, have you ever considered your own children when you do this? Julia's mother joined in the persuasion. Do you want your child to grow up in a broken home? It is for the sake of my children that I have to do this all the more. Mark said firmly, I can't let my child grow up in an environment full of deception and lies. Also, you should know how many families have been destroyed and wives have been separated by David's program. Julia must be held accountable for her actions. You're really determined. Julia's father said angrily, well, since you're so desperate, don't blame us for not being polite. After hanging up the phone, Mark's mood was a bit heavy. He knew that Julia's parents had a great deal of influence in the business world, and if they really wanted to take a shot at him, he would face no small amount of pressure. As expected, within a few days, Mark realized that several important projects of his company had some problems. First, the partners suddenly proposed to reassess the risk of cooperation. Then the bank tightened the loan amount to the company, and even some media began to report some negative news about the company. Mark realizes that this is Julia's family starting to pressure him. Through these tactics, they are trying to force him to compromise and give up his pursuit of Julia. Mark, are you okay? Ryan called, concerned. I heard you had a situation over there. I'm fine. Mark forced himself to calm down. All of this was expected. How's it going on your end? Any progress on David's case? Not too optimistic. Ryan sighed. Although the evidence is overwhelming, David has hired a very well-known lawyer who has been trying to exonerate him. Also, Julia is actively campaigning for him to try to reduce his sentence through some legal loophole. I see. A glint of severity flashed in Mark's eyes. Looks like I'll have to give them some credit. Mark began to fight back aggressively. He first contacted his friends in the business world to seek their help and support. He then hired a professional PR firm to clarify negative reports about the company and actively steer public opinion to divert the public's attention to David's fraud case. At the same time, Mark also commissioned a private detective to start investigating Julia's parents' company. He suspects that Julia's parents' company may also have some problems and may even be connected to David's scam. Under Mark's strong counterattack, the situation began to change gradually. As more and more media attention is drawn to David's case, and the public skepticism of Julia's family grows, Julia's parents, whose company is being investigated by the authorities, are left to fend for themselves and are no longer in a position to put pressure on Mark. Julia, on the other hand, finally realizes that she's at the end of her rope after running into walls all over the place. She tries to contact Mark again, hoping to reconcile with him. Mark, let's talk, okay? On the other end of the phone, Julia's voice was filled with exhaustion and helplessness. I know I did a lot of things wrong before, but for the sake of our many years as a couple, can't you give me another chance? Chance? How many times have I given you a chance? Mark said coldly. But what did you do? You lied to me over and over again, used me, and even tried to destroy me. Julia, you disappoint me so much. I know I'm still in love with you, Mark. I just got confused and I promise I'll never do it again. Let's start over, okay? Julia's voice had a sobbing tone to it, and she sounded very pathetic. A fresh start? Do you think it's even possible between us? Mark asked rhetorically. Julia, wake up, it's over between us. From the moment you threw coffee in my face, from the moment you chose to take David's side, we were over. No, Mark, don't do this, pleaded Julia as she tried to continue. But Mark had no patience to listen any longer. Julia, this is the last time I'm going to talk to you. Mark's voice was cold and determined. I've filed a divorce suit with the court and frozen the joint accounts, so get a lawyer to contact Helen, my attorney, as soon as possible to discuss the divorce settlement. As for David, he must pay for his behavior. You do yourself a favor. After saying that, Mark hung up the phone. He knew that the storm was finally coming to an end. Mark hung up the phone from Julia and let out a long breath of relief. He knew that this protracted battle was finally drawing to a close. Although physically and mentally exhausted, he never regretted his choice. The next day, everything is in order. David's case in Los Angeles trial. In the face of a mountain of hard evidence, he was powerless to defend himself and was ultimately found guilty of fraud, money laundering, and other crimes, several crimes, was sentenced to 10 years in prison and imposed a huge fine. Julia, as an accomplice, was not directly involved in the fraud, but she had assisted David in the false advertising for a long time and made a large amount of illegal profits from it, and she was also sentenced to the appropriate penalty, albeit a shorter one. As Julia's parents' company was also involved, not only was it discredited, but it was also fined a huge amount of money, and the company went down in flames. Not much rippled through Mark's heart as he heard the news. He knew that this was the punishment they deserved and the price they paid for their greed and stupidity. And as for Julia, he had completely let go of this woman, who would completely disappear from his life. Mark and Julia's divorce proceedings also went exceptionally well, as Mark had a lot of evidence of Julia's marital faults and Julia's attempts to transfer property before the divorce were caught by Mark's attorney, Helen, and presented to the court. As a result, the court ruled that Mark was awarded the majority of the marital assets, as well as custody of the children. When Helen handed Mark the divorce decree, he felt a sense of relief. The marriage, full of deception and betrayal, had finally come to an end. Mr. Mark, congratulations, you're free. Helen smiled. What's next for you? Thank you, Helen, Mark said as he took the judgment, his mind overwhelmed with emotion. I think I'll take some time off and then start a new life. Yes, a new life. Mark has already made plans to take his child away from the sad place of New York and start a new life in a brand new place. He wants his child to grow up in a healthy, happy environment, away from all the filth and ugliness. A few days later, Mark boarded a flight to another city with his children, with simple luggage. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, including Ryan, and he just wanted to say goodbye to the past and start a whole new journey. The plane took off, and Mark looked through the porthole at the smaller and smaller city on the ground with mixed feelings. He knew that his life would turn over a new page, and that everything in the past would be a cloud in the sky. In his new city, where the sun shines and the air is fresh, Mark takes his children into a cozy, comfortable apartment that he had arranged months in advance. He chooses an excellent school for his children and sets out to start a new company. After a few months of hard work, Mark's new company is gradually getting on track. With his excellent ability and good reputation in the industry, the company soon gained a lot of customers and the business is booming. Mark, on the other hand, has gradually stepped out of the shadow of the past. He no longer indulges in remorse and anger over the past, but devotes all his energy to his work and his children. Every day, he personally takes his child to and from school, does homework with him, plays games, and reads him stories. He strives to be a good father and make up for what he owes his child over the past few years. On weekends, Mark will take his children to the countryside or visit museums or science and technology centers to broaden their horizons and increase their knowledge. He hopes that his child can grow up healthily in a loving and caring environment and become a decent, kind, and responsible person. Looking at the big smile on his child's face, Mark felt immense relief. He knew that he had made the right choice in the beginning. Although the process was full of hardships, he finally won the life he wanted. Apart from his work and children, Mark also started to try to make some new friends. He attended some industry gatherings and joined some hobby clubs, where he met some like-minded people who shared each other's experiences and looked forward to a bright future together. Among these friends, Mark was impressed by a woman named Sophia, an excellent interior designer who is independent, confident, loves life, and exudes a unique charm. Mark and Sophia met at a friend's party. They chatted as if they had endless topics to talk about, from work to life, from hobbies to life aspirations. As the relationship deepens, Mark finds himself appreciating Sophia more and more, who not only has outstanding appearance and elegant temperament, but also has a kind and sincere heart. Her passion for life and serious attitude towards work deeply attracted Mark. Sophia, too, is impressed by Mark's maturity, stability, and sense of responsibility. She knows that Mark has been through a failed marriage, but she does not see any negativity and decadence in Mark. Instead, she sees a positive and never-give-up spirit. As they spend time together, their feelings for each other gradually warm up and they eventually come together. Sophia's appearance brings new colors to Mark's life and gives him hope for the future. "Mark, you're a good man," Sophia whispered as she snuggled into Mark's arms on a warm afternoon. "I'm sure that you'll get better and better." "Thank you, Sophia," Mark hugged her tightly, his heart filled with gratitude. "Meeting you has been the greatest blessing of my life." A few years have passed, and Mark's company has established itself in the city as a leader in the industry. And his child, too, is growing up to be a smart, bright, and cheerful teenager. On a sunny weekend, Mark took Sophia and the kids to the countryside for a picnic. They spread out the cloth on a green grassy field, set out all kinds of delicious food, and enjoyed this rare cozy time. The children ran around happily, chasing butterflies and letting out giggles, while Mark and Sophia snuggled up together, enjoying the quiet time. "Mark, do you remember the first time we met?" Sophia asked suddenly. "Of course I remember." Mark smiled. "That time at Harry's party, you were wearing a red dress that was so pretty. I noticed you right away." "Yeah? I didn't even notice you." Sophia winked mischievously. "At the time, I was just talking to someone else." "And what happened then? When did you first notice me?" Mark pursued. "Later." Sophia thought for a moment. "Probably when you told me stories about your past. I could sense that you were a sincere, responsible person, and your love for your children touched me deeply." Mark took Sophia's hand and said fondly, "Thank you, Sophia, for being willing to come into my life and bring me so much joy and hope. Silly, I should be the one thanking you. Sophia leaned her head on Mark's shoulder. You're the one who made me believe that life can still be so beautiful even through the storms. In the distance, the child ran and waved at them, shouting, Daddy, Sophia, come look, I found a colorful butterfly. Mark and Sophia smiled at each other, got up together, and walked towards the child. The sunlight sprinkled on them, stretching their silhouettes for a long, long time, as if they were stretching all the way to the far distance, to that hopeful and bright future. At this moment, Mark feels that he is the happiest man in the world. He has a career he loves, a family he loves dearly, and a future full of hope. All of this, he knew, was not easy to come by, but he would cherish it. Looking back, that marriage, full of betrayal and hurt, had become an episode in his life. Although it had once caused him a lot of pain, it had also made him understand better what true love and happiness were. He is thankful for this experience because it has allowed him to grow, to transform, and to finally find his own happiness. And for the road ahead, he will walk hand in hand with Sophia and his children to create a better tomorrow. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.